Okay, in this lesson, I'm going to teach you the basics of the GameMaker interface. We're going to do a few lessons that will follow it as well that will show you different things that we can do with GameMaker, and each one will be a short video showing you what I want you to get out of it. When you open GameMaker 8, you have an option. We're going to currently use the Lite edition. You can purchase the Pro edition, which does give you some added features in GameMaker, but we're going to be starting with the Lite edition. Okay, now this is the GameMaker environment. Right over here there's a tutorial that you could go through on your own if you download GameMaker at home. I'm going to hide that for now. Now what you see is pretty much the blank GameMaker environment. I haven't created anything yet. If you notice on the left side, there are a number of folders: sprites, sounds, backgrounds, objects, rooms. Then there's something called game information and global game settings. We're going to cover just about all of that in time. But think of it as this is where the resources for the game are stored. Okay? You know, your menus up here will also be helpful in terms of saving and all sorts of other things. And for now, we want to kind of differentiate a little bit about what some of these different areas are. And I'm going to start with basically talking about sprites, objects, and rooms. Sounds and backgrounds are fairly self-explanatory. Sounds are going to be where you're going to store sounds that you want to put in your game. Backgrounds are just, you know, images that you're going to use as the background. Sprites, though, that might be a new term to you, I'm not sure. Sprites are essentially the graphics that you're going to use in a game. Okay? The sprite by itself doesn't do anything. Think of it as the library where we're going to just store all the images that we might use in the game. Okay? But the sprite by itself is just the image that you're going to use. When you're ready to make this do things, we're going to create objects. Now, objects might use the sprite as the picture that's associated with the object, but the object is where the programming happens, where you can tell these things what to do by basically programming. The area for rooms is going to be the different game levels, so we're going to create those rooms, which is where the action is going to take place. And the game information, which I'll talk about also, is where you would put the rules for the game, how to play, the storyline, all of that you want people to read when they enter the game before they start playing, and also to be able to refer back to throughout the game. So think of that as the, you know, how to play the game and all of that. Okay? So now we're going to start with sprites, and we're going to, as we go, we're going to develop a very simple game together. The sprite, to add one, I'm going to right-click on that and choose Create Sprite. I could also go up here to this little Pac-Man looking thing and click on it to create a sprite. I'm going to do it this way. Right-click, Create Sprite. Now, when we go to name resources in our games, you want to utilize a conventional or a consistent naming convention. So in our case, for sprites, I'm going to always start them with lowercase spr. Okay, that way, if I were to refer to it in the programming at some point, it's easy to remember that, you know, it's a sprite because it's SPR. I'm going to put a ball in the game, and I'm going to use capital B, lowercase a, LL for that. So that's going to be my naming convention, which I'm going to stay with, which is always going to be a prefix, usually 3 letters, followed by a capital letter for what I'm naming it. You can also, another naming convention that's reasonable is SPR underscore ball, if that's more comfortable to you. Either way is fine as long as you stay with the same system. When I evaluate your games, I will be looking at your naming convention. Now, I'm going to load a sprite. Now, in this case, in Program Files GameMaker 8, there's a sprites folder, which has a number of built-in resources. There are other resources you can download. I am going to go to the Bouncing Balls folder, and I'm going to just for now choose this basketball and choose OK. So there's my wonderful sprite of a basketball. Okay? Now, the start of this game, what I want to do is I want to create a room that has basically a wall around it and a basketball, that's going to randomly move around, and if it hits the walls, it's going to bounce around. That's going to be our first goal in this game. So I'm going to need a wall for a sprite as well. So I'm going to create another sprite, and for this one, I'm going to go back to this directory, and I'm going to go into tutorial, and there happens to be a wall sprite there, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to call it SPR wall. Okay? I'll click OK. Now I'm ready to create objects out of these two items. Okay, so I'm going to right-click and create a new object. The first one I'll call OBJ ball. Now I'll use, and in here I'll click to choose a sprite. I already have my sprite ball, so that's what I'll use. And I'll click OK. And then finally I'll add my OBJ wall. This one, it's going to be important, is solid, and I'll use the wall. And if you notice here it says events and actions. That's something different in objects than sprites. Sprites, I cannot define events and actions. Objects you can. That's where you tell it what it can do. So I'm going to click OK for now. Before I give it those objects and actions, I'm going to just set up my first room so I know what it's going to look like. So I'm going to create room by right-clicking and create room. And in this case, I know that this sprite was 32 by 32. Oftentimes, that's the what I want to set up as the grid, 32 by 32, especially in this case, because I know it'll fit nicely in there. I'm going to maximize this, because I'm going to want to put my the walls in there. But if this is not maximized, I might not realize it, but when I start putting them in, it might actually go lower, and I could miss an area. So in this case, if I maximize it, I see what I'm really working with. Another neat thing is when I'm placing things in a room, if I hit Shift and click and drag, it's kind of like painting the objects right in the room. Okay? And now finally, for our purposes now, I'm going to put a ball somewhere in the room. Okay? I have not programmed the wall or the ball to do anything yet. So right now, if I were to play my game, this is all I'll get. Okay, very exciting. Whoa. Now, I do want to do a few other things. Under settings, I want to name my room. And again, I'll use a naming convention. I'll call it RM for room, and I'll just call it level 1, let's say. And then I'll put level 1 here. Now, the width and height that I have here, I can change that, and in this case, my game will fit in the middle of the computer screen. It will not take up more than one screen, and that's fine. I want you to be able to see the whole room in your game. Kind of like when we were exploring things like Pac-Man and Frogger and all those games, you notice those all stayed only, you saw the whole screen on the board, okay? You saw the whole level on the screen. When we create other games, you might decide that it makes more sense for the type of game to have it span many, many, many screens where your character moves and the world keeps kind of being unfolded. That you can do as well. That's not what we're going to do right now. Okay? So now we're at the point where what I have to do is tell the ball and the wall what they can do. Okay? So I'm going to go and actually going to do all this programming for the wall right now. Because there's really nothing that I want to tell the wall to do, but I do want to tell the ball what to do. So under events, I'm going to add an event called create. Now this is for the ball. It means when the ball is created, it's going to do something. In this case, I'm going to tell it to move around the room or move in a random direction, I should say. And because I want it to be a random direction, I'm going to choose every possible direction, but not include the center, which would be stop, because I don't want there to be a random chance of it not moving. And I'm going to tell it to move at a speed of 3. Okay? Now I'll show you that so far, and let's see if it does what you think it should do. And it did what I told it to do. You might not be happy with what it's doing, but because you probably wanted it to bounce off the wall, but I did not tell it to do that yet. So I'm going to now close this, and now I'm going to tell it that if it collides with the wall, then it should do something. In this case, I'm going to tell it it should bounce off the wall. And I'm not worried, not precisely is fine, and again, solid objects is fine because I made the wall solid. Okay? So right now, and it's also referring to when it says self, because remember, I'm programming the ball. If I had, I'll just leave it at that for now. Okay? Now, when I play my game, it's going to move, and it's going to bounce. Okay? Very exciting. If I play again, hopefully it will go in a different direction and bounce, based on the direction it's going, and it did. Okay, if it were going on an angle, it would bounce in such a way that it could bounce around the room a little bit, and that's what we've got so far. So I'm going to stop there, and you're going to try to create this much at this point.